我硬漢子拼出一生痴，流汗血盡赤心追尋大義，生命作賭注留下了英雄故事，憂患見骨氣，昂步顧盼似醒獅。
In writing this series, this episode has been by far the hardest to write. If I could spend half an hour barely scratching the surface of just one movie with Seven Samurai, how could I possibly make a single satisfactory episode around Hong Kong action cinema and beyond? As you may have realised by now, this is not an exhaustive history, but a tour through the moments in action cinema since the very beginning that have struck me personally. A ton of research has gone into this, but in the end, this is sort of a tour through what I hope will lead to me having a career making action films, with my own work drawing from so much of what I cover here. So, where to begin? Well, before all of this, there was Come Drink With Me. King Hugh is an integral figure to what would become Hong Kong and mainland action cinema and beyond.
我心目中有一个偶像，这是胡金铨。我的电影的话，给我最大影响的还是胡金铨的电影。
If you want to learn anything about King Hugh, I recommend The King of Wuxia, an incredible deep dive into the work and life of one of the most important figures of all cinema history, not just action. But what I want to draw attention to is the most integral theme of this whole series: reflection on what came before to inspire the entrepreneurial in creating something new.
东洋东西跟西方东西结合起来，这么一加起来，以前中国没有这些，它就变成很亮眼的东西。 所以他一下子就把他的所学、所理解的东西就翻到影像去。
There is absolutely a direct link through the history we have covered into the man who inspired so much of what Hong Kong action cinema would become. Hugh didn't even consider himself a director of action, in fact going as far as to say,
랑로아니 가라에가 도래는 안타고서 도르베키스다 って言われてさ。でまだ今のカラー気に入らないって言ったらさ、そんなことないって、もう20年ぐらい前にエーゼンシュタインがこういうものを撮ってるから見ろっつってシネマテイクでそのイワン・ライテの見せられたらすごいんだよこれが。ほんで撮る気になったんだけどね。
It was a dance scene that convinced Kurosawa to try colour. It was the musical that stuck with John Woo, which we'll get to. And it was Peking opera that inspired King Hugh. So much has been written about the Peking opera and the impact it had, the figures it introduced to the film business, so I won't go over that ground here. What King Hugh did with the Peking opera was successfully translate its beats to the screen, but at a faster pace, utilising a Kurosawa-esque dynamic camera. He understood blocking with the camera around and with the action that created a modern form of action that we use today, based around dance.
这些外国影评人说我的动作设置场面很像一幕一幕的芭蕾舞，我承认是受胡金铨的那种动态的美感跟节奏、音乐节奏的那边学过来。
I said this in episode 1, having spoken to John Wick director Chad Stielski about this very subject, and it bears focusing on in detail here. The inspiration of Peking opera would be seen of its perhaps floral movement throughout the Shaw Brothers cinema that would iterate on the style seen in Come Drink With Me, utilising a very important word: choreography. This is dance, and it is based on hitting beats, known as poses. This is still how films are choreographed today, When stepping through a scene, such as I did with my film Asir here, we number each beat, the way one would a dance, and you are aiming for each pose between the movements. That is the lesson I took from the Shaw Brothers films that legendary directors like Chang Che and later Lau Kar-leung understood. Each composition has to work best to feature the pose the shot is, in a sense, timed to aim at. The camera dancing with the blocking to hit each beat in the most visually satisfactory way. Ignore the combat here and think of the composition. There is a marriage between camera and movement. Every pose is almost perfectly composed within the frame, beat by beat. You never miss a moment. Understanding this, the power of thinking through each camera setup within the choreography, as if it was a third person in the fight, is to me paramount. Rules are made to be broken, same as here. But understanding this feels absolutely essential for such divergences to be approached. Spielberg, of course, made something purposely chaotic like this, but understands the role of camera placement in scene blocking better than perhaps any other living director. Which brings me to something that I feel is overlooked, sometimes even made fun of, with sequences like this. Sound design. There is a tweeness to this sort of exaggerated, repeated sound effect, but it exists for a reason. They are there for design, but also for hit detection. It is a language of hit, counter, miss, and pain. Often, sound design is dulled nowadays amid the cacophony of violence. To me, lessening the actual impact of the fight itself. Now in Tenet, there is a narrative reason for this sound design being so muted. But listen to the impact here, or lack thereof. Now this works for this sequence, a moment I actually love for its inventiveness, but it demonstrates my point. Impact is important if you were to communicate a hit, both in the striking of a pose and the clashing of fists. We require sound design to tell us in a fight scene what kind of hit has been struck or missed. Regarding the use of shooting and editing around beats of action, today I feel like we often see action filmmakers looking to shoot for as long as possible, favouring wide angles on roving cameras to show off as much of the fight as possible. Now this does work, but where it showcases the talent of the actors in the scene, to me it restricts other dramatic possibilities quite a bit. For one, you need a larger space, with less objects around, to allow such movement of the performers and camera for an extended shot, making both the frame more empty and thus lacking the tense possibilities for collision with the environment by the characters. I loved the film Kill this year, which due to its restricted space obviously eschewed anything like this. The action there is cut quickly, but each shot counts for what it is trying to sell, and does so brilliantly. The lighting also has to be broader in a sequence like this, flattening the image and at least somewhat deadening the possible personality of the sequence, making something that feels more along the lines of many other timely action films. The performances here are great, and in showing off that, the direction does a spectacular job. Recently I saw Life After Fighting, a film that moves past its very low budget to showcase the best of this sort of action. Bren Foster directs and stars in a combination of the raid's intensity with the sit back and take it all in showcasing of martial arts taken to a tremendous level. On what is clearly an exceedingly low budget, he's sort of taken this broadly lit, sparsely decorated, wide-ish framed action to its zenith for cheaper than most. Finally, this is sometimes just harder on your performers, and it is partially why Gareth Evans ended up changing up the direction for The Raid from his previous martial arts film, Merantau.
We were doing a lot of long take steady cam shots in Merantau. Our actors and our fighters were getting burnt out by the end of each take because you're doing long stretches of a shot where there's no respite. After Merantau, we started taking a slightly different approach in terms of how to shoot action, trying to design stuff with a few shorter shots in there, because then they can become easier to achieve and easier to execute on set. It builds momentum, and then also you're not allowing the audience to kind of be too far back from the action to the point where they can scrutinize if there's a mishit here or a slight lagging of pace there.
The Raid has so much personality in its action scenes, and yet is so specific in its compositions. Each shot is purposely framed around the beats it intends to capture, and no more. They are designed with the next shot in mind. That doesn't at all mean it's wrong to shoot coverage. Such as how, for example, Eddie Hamilton received expansive coverage to craft fight scenes in post for Mission Impossible 5. But for something like this, there is always intense planning that goes into each shot. In my opinion, it looks the better for it. Does it mean you shouldn't do long takes? Hell, no, they're fucking sick. I love them. But I do think considering the framing throughout is integral. And beyond this, stitched together long takes can be really impressive. But due to much of how they are made, you often end up with frames like this, over and over again. The Shaw Brothers would maintain a hold on Hong Kong cinema for a long time, but someone was coming. Blasting apart convention and grounding the trampolines and wires into something new. What can I really say about one of the most famous people, well, ever? There are dozens of documentaries, books, video essays on Bruce Lee, and little I can add. He came at a time when there was a thirst for this sort of more intense, more grounded action. And he defined it when given the chance. We can still see that Wuxia influence in his first proper action film, The Big Boss. But after that success, he took the action direction reins, for the most part, in Fist of Fury. You can see the difference between old and new style in a sequence Bruce doesn't appear in, and apparently let the film's official veteran action director, Han Ying-Chia, handle, to how the work he had more of a hand in looks. Han Ying-Chia, of course, is an integral figure to the history of Wuxia cinema, as actor and as choreographer or coordinator, but represented what Bruce was trying to move away from. What is there to learn from Bruce that hasn't already been learned? Well, for a start, what's most interesting to me is how hard to replace he was, try as they might. Even Jackie Chan under Big Boss and Fist of Fury director Lo Wei was tested time and time again as a Bruce replacement, but the personality of Bruce, that special ingredient he had, just could not be recreated.
There are a lot of Bruce Lee impersonators. Bronson Lee, Evan Kim, Johnny Yoon, Bruce Lung, Bruce Lai, who was actually Ray Malonzo, Bruce Lai, L.A.I., Bruce Tai, Bruce K.L. Lee, Bruce Lowe, who was actually Yasuaki Kurata, Judy Lee, who was billed as Bruce Lee's sister and Queen Boxer. The world couldn't let go of Bruce Lee.
It's hard to quantify what it was about Bruce that made him stand out, especially since arguably he only really made two great films with Fist of Fury and Enter the Dragon. It speaks to what this series is about and what I hope most take from all of these episodes. Learning from what came before is integral, But standing out by doing what is right for your story, by your characters, is what matters. Arguably, it was in finding comedy that Jackie Chan and Sammo Hung & Co. found their footing. Something Bruce Lee somewhat introduced with Way of the Dragon, less successfully in my opinion. It was learning to trust in other performers the way, due to his success, producers were forced to trust in Bruce, that led to the expansive legacy of action heroes that dominates our memory of Hong Kong cinema. He was a figure of the oppressed, first and foremost. A folk hero. And cynically recreating that just doesn't work.
That you can point directly to the beginning of the exploitation of martial arts movies from Asia on a global basis. There was nobody getting rich at Golden Harvest. Every dollar was going on the screen.
That is an important lesson. Hollywood has rarely gotten the balance right of how to direct action, and where to put the money to support action sequences.
The American, they just say, okay, just one wide angle, one close up. Cut, okay, then second shot, just like that, Sam. They don't know. So very hard to tell them to concentrate on the drama. Okay, fighting scene, they give you 1 day, 2 days, that's it. They don't care about you, what do you want, what are you shooting, how do you create the fight. They think it's very easy, but it isn't that easy. They don't understand.
Time and time again, Hollywood looked to Asia for the next big thing, and yet over and over, they misunderstood the processes of those they brought to the States. From Kurosawa being forced out of Runaway Train back in the 60s, to Jackie Chan struggling to maintain his inimitable style overseas, and John Woo fighting to keep his heroic bloodshed substance alive in the USA. The evolution of action cinema in America is a story of misunderstanding and potential lessons repeatedly ignored.
黒沢さんは70ミリカラーで考えたんですよね。それがだからモノクロだっていう話になってきて、私はアメリカ側のその考え方としては、ほとんど全編雪なわけですから真っ白なんだし、そこへね鉄の塊の機関車が真っ黒けが走るわけだから、モノクロで悪いことはないだろうっていう。
Two great examples of the difference between Hong Kong and Hollywood exist that I would like to look at. One well known in Jackie Chan's second US film The Protector, with its American and Hong Kong cuts, and one lesser known. James Glickenhaus did direct The Protector, an entertaining enough watch but very much a lesser film in the Jackie Chan filmography. His second, not entirely successful, attempt at the American market. But what has been most valuable to me is the alternate cut Chan did of the film, himself an accomplished action director and editor. Comparing the two is enlightening in the approach to direction, and both do work. Chan is of course working with footage here he didn't entirely direct, so it's not up to his usual standard, but it is worth exploring. Glickenhaus's version is a pretty good fight. And I actually use this opening shot as a bit of inspiration for my short, Asir. But there is something missing, a certain intensity. What the editors have to work with is solid, but it's captured and edited by filmmakers more used to the usual master shot and over-the-shoulder fight scenes we typically saw at the time. This is a pretty exciting sequence. Elevated, of course, by the performers involved, but it lacks dynamism. As if the US filmmakers know what they have is great, and they want to show it. But perhaps by showing too much, they are, as mentioned previously, tugging a little bit of the personality out of it. The US version was edited by Evan Lotman, in addition to Glickenhaus, who had most recently worked on Sophie's Choice and The Muppets Take Manhattan. But the Hong Kong version was edited by Jackie Chan, with newly shot footage, and Peter Chung. I will not list out Chung's credits, as it's an insane filmography, but he has a credit as editor on every film currently appearing on screen.
his guys were very talented. There was good choreography. You know, I think when we had the climactic battle at the end, I was less interested in Jackie's opinion as to how that should be, and I wanted to make it more hard-edged and brutal. And Raymond came to me and said, look, Jackie would really like to have you come and redo that and put more stuff in for the Asian market. I said, it's not going to play, but I will let you direct the scene the way he, you know, add some of that stuff for the Asian market.
How much was reshot here by Chan for later use, with hindsight, admittedly, and how much was just discarded for the US edit and then reinstated later by Chan is unclear. But for me, the Hong Kong cut is drastically better. It has far more action beats, the sound effects are way more present, adding to the intensity, and Chan just knows how to build a moment. For example, turning 2 minor beats in the US version into a heroic triumph in the Hong Kong cut.
The most important part is editing. There's a lot of, I find out in America, most of the directors, they don't know how to edit it. When they do the punch things, boom, cut. Then second shot, from here, boom, again, it's wrong.
Again, I actually want to give some major respect to Glickenhaus for this fight. He had a different intention, and though it's not to my taste, this is the year Chan directed one of the greatest action films of all time. The comparison is almost unfair. Glickenhaus's work also provided much of the content needed for Chan to improve the fight, and often Chan did leave what Glickenhaus had put together as is for his cut.
See, first, you're gonna help me out of my chair, and then I'm gonna leapfrog over you before I break his nose.
This is Charlie's Angels, with action by Yuen Woo Ping, arguably the most successful transition point between Hong Kong and Hollywood in terms of action, with films such as Kill Bill and The Matrix depending on his singular talent for action choreography and sequence construction. This is clearly inspired by Hong Kong martial arts cinema, but more than you may realise.
Buddha on Lotus.
Many of these moves are directly lifted from Iron Monkey, the classic 1993 Trey Hark produced martial arts action film directed by Charlie's Angels fight choreographer Yuen Woo Ping.
到拍完呢個戲時候咧，差請做嘅時候咧，個導演物資佢就會睇某香港嘅動作片某一段，佢我要呢個動作，佢指定動作我要邊個，咁我哋呢嗰啲咁樣嘅，即係幾部戲夾埋，我就一場戲夾埋俾佢度再即係度招俾佢，即係好多戲都有㗎啦，係點解話？
Again, I actually quite like this fight sequence, but you can see the difference in the filmmaking craft clearly at moments, such as cuts that mute the impact of hits or the way falls are captured. Hong Kong action at its best was about adding a story to every movement, to every beat. But the thing with this sort of kung fu action, as it moved closer and closer to modern day, is it kept having to contend with one big question.
Guns. Now, why doesn't somebody pull a 45 and bang, settle it? No guns.
It was John Woo who would marry the typical Hong Kong kung fu and wuxia sensibilities to gunfights, with what we often now call gun fu or gun kata. Each gunshot was a punch. Action and reaction happened in the same shot. And he would set the template for heroic bloodshed as a subgenre. A combination of themes such as brotherhood, morality, and redemption.
佢有勇氣去改過，點解你冇勇氣接受佢？點解？做兄弟啫。
Or at least, Woo would bring the style, where arguably 2 years prior to A Better Tomorrow, Long Arm of the Law had brought the substance to what we now call heroic bloodshed. A gritty, dark, violent film that I urge you to check out.
I already wanted to make a gangster film or a movie like The Samurai or The Red Circle, but the studio didn't let me do it because at that time all they want was a kung fu film and what we call a fist and pillow. It means sex and violence. That's what the studio needs.
Starting with his earlier work such as Hand of Death and Last Hurrah for Chivalry, after working under Chang Che, Woo for me is one of the reasons I made this series. He is the point I'm making here, that looking back, taking what worked from everywhere, not just action, and learning from it, understanding it, interrogating it, and then redeveloping the things that you relate to as your own, is where true invention and a strong language of physical action filmmaking comes from.
龙门客栈是影响太深远了，题材、剧本、简介、音乐、演员的演出、性格的描述，打造场面的那种节奏感、那种调度，都让所有人，不光是我，让所有电影人都学了很多，而且跟风的也很多。一下子，香港影坛很多个胡金铨出来，当然我也是当中的一个。
Back to back, that's Butch Cassidy and Sundance Kid. When they rush out in a final shot, they would sort of like back to back. That's also one of John's favorite films.
As we saw in the first episode, William Goldman's inspiration for this moment and the brotherhood of the characters reaches all the way back to 1939's Gunga Din, bringing us back full circle to where we started. Another director heavily inspired by The Wild Bunch, Woo iterated on the chaotic and sometimes jarring slow motion employed by Peckinpah, bringing a new and unique formality to its use, one of stretching time, so as to allow the action to become more elegant and more easy to follow. Moments that could be over in seconds were then extended to last, well, as long as John Woo felt they should. He made the action romantic over chaotic. But even when sped up, his work is completely legible. He was extremely deliberate with what he shot, what he edited, and what speed it played at. Learned from a life of studying cinema. It reminds me of how if you watch The Matrix, with action of course handled in part by Woo's contemporary Yuen Woo Ping, in a film heavily inspired by Woo's work, the slow motion scenes are still entirely legible at normal speed. What I love about John Woo, and why I was inspired to make this series, the more I develop my own very early work, is how generous he is with his inspirations, with those he pulls from. He hides nothing, and has become one of the most integral figures in what would become the later action cinema around the world.
This action sequence was learned from the Japanese samurai movie. The mood, the build-up, the pace, and the rhythm of the action is pretty much like Kurosawa's film, Yojimbo. Editing is a fun thing. You see the moment when Zhou Yunfan doing the 3 times double spin, repeating the same action, and then he leap up in the air, shoot the guy. And this kind of stylish cutting became one of my trademark. I saw Zhou Yunfan spinning 3 times, and I tried to cut it tight, make it all in one fast move. But repeating the same action, it looks so much fun. And the body movement looks so beautiful and elegant. It's really pretty much like a ballet dancing. 他的武打动作当然是对我们影响也很大了，拍出了动作节奏的美感，把一个动作不光是能够融汇京剧的特色，而且还有一种像舞蹈这样的感觉。
even at this length of an episode, I have barely scratched the surface of Hong Kong action cinema and beyond. From the outsized personalities responsible for so many genres, to especially the importance of women, from the very start of Wuxia and martial arts cinema, all the way to now. And entire subgenres I haven't even mentioned, like comedy and spooky martial arts cinema. There is so much to honour in the rich history in contemporary Hong Kong and mainland cinema that I urge you to explore yourself. Action cinema is a story of iteration and evolution as much as true originality and entrepreneurial spirit. Without John Ford, you perhaps wouldn't have Kurosawa. And without Kurosawa, you may not have had Sergio Leone or King Hu. And without Hu, maybe no Chang Che. And without Che, perhaps no John Woo. And without John Woo, perhaps there is no The Crow, The Matrix, or any number of beloved action films. When you say action film, many think of the big stereotypical American picture. But it's no secret that we required so much of world cinema to get to that point. But then, perhaps John Woo's biggest inspiration, at least for A Better Tomorrow, the French director Jean-Pierre Melville, could not have made his resonant masterpiece Le Samouraï without that most classic of American staples.
Ça correspond à quoi pour vous les gangsters?
Les gangsters ne correspondent à rien. Pour moi, je trouve que ce sont des pauvres types, des minables. Mais il se trouve que les histoires de gangsters représentent un véhicule facile à exploiter pour cette forme de tragédie moderne qu'est le film noir tiré de la littérature noire américaine.
The complex, morally questionable, hard-boiled American star of paperback fiction would not remain on the page, however. And as the perhaps stuffy 50s came to an end, and the Western began to lose its luster, a new anti-hero would emerge. Nestled between Melville and Woo, with a series of violent, controversial, and undeniably brilliant works, America was finally going to plant its flag as the home of a certain type of brutally masculine action thriller picture.
You gotta ask yourself a question. Do I feel lucky? Well, do you, punk?
Hey! What? You dead yet?
Well, what does it sound like?
Who won then?
Whoever dies last.